ਤੁਸੀਂ ਦੇਖ ਰਹੇ ਆ ਸਿੱਖ ਚੈਨਲ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਪ੍ਰੋਗਰਾਮ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਜੋ ਵੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਜ਼ਿੰਦਗੀ ਦੇ ਏਰੀਆਜ਼ ਨੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਅਸੀਂ ਕੁਝ ਐਡ ਕਰ ਸਕੀਏ। ਜੇ ਕੋਈ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਐਡਵਾਈਸ ਚਾਹੀਦੀ ਆ ਤੇ ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਪੂਰੀ ਕੋਸ਼ਿਸ਼ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਕਿ ਵੱਖ ਫੀਲਡਸ ਤੋਂ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਇਨਫੋਰਮੇਸ਼ਨ, ਨੌਲੇਜ ਬੇਸ ਲੈ ਕੇ ਆਈਏ। ਤਾਂ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਸੋਲਿਸਿਟਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਜੋ ਕਿ ਕੰਟੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਸ ਪ੍ਰੋਬੇਟ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਐਕਸਪਰਟ ਨੇ। ਇਹ ਕੀ ਆ ਇਹ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਤੋਂ ਜਾਣਾਂਗੇ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਜੇ ਮੈਂ ਇੱਕ ਸਿੰਪਲ ਭਾਸ਼ਾ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਦੱਸਾਂ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਮੌਤ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਆਪਣੇ ਘਰ ਵਾਲਿਆਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਇੱਕ ਵਿਲ ਤਿਆਰ ਕਰਦੇ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ, ਇੱਕ ਵਸੀਹਤ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਛੱਡ ਕੇ ਜਾਂਦੇ ਆ, ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਸਾਡੇ ਪੂਰੇ ਹੋਣ ਤੋਂ ਬਾਅਦ ਕਾਫੀ ਵਾਰ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੰਡ ਪੈ ਜਾਂਦੀ ਆ। ਕਈ ਵਾਰ ਕਈ ਸਾਰੀ ਮੁਸ਼ਕਲਾਂ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਲੜਾਈਆਂ ਹੁੰਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਭੈਣ ਭਰਾਵਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਆ, ਬੱਚਿਆਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀ ਆ, ਕਈ ਇਲਜ਼ਾਮ ਲੱਗਦੇ ਨੇ। ਸੋ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕੀ ਕੀਤਾ ਜਾਏ? ਇੱਕ ਉਹ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਵਸੀਹਤ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਛੱਡੀ ਗਈ ਆ, ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਡਾ ਉਹਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਨਾਂ ਨਹੀਂ ਹੈਗਾ, ਜਾਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਹੈ ਕਿ ਕੋਈ ਗਲਤੀ ਵਾਪਰੀ ਗਈ ਆ, ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਜਾਣ ਕੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕੋਈ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਸ਼ੱਕ ਪੈਂਦੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਜਾਣ ਕੇ ਕੋਈ ਚੀਜ਼ ਵਾਪਰੀ ਗਈ ਆ, ਤੇ ਇਹ ਸਾਰੀ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਤੁਹਾਡੀ ਇੱਕ ਮਜਬੂਰੀ ਆ, ਇਹਦਾ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਧਨ ਪਾ ਸਕਦੇ ਆ ਜਦੋਂ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਇੱਕ ਚੰਗੇ ਐਕਸਪਰਟ ਵਕੀਲ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਦੇ ਆ। ਤਾਂ ਹੀ ਇਸੇ ਰਿਲੇਟਡ ਅੱਜ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਨ ਜਾ ਰਹੇ ਹਾਂ ਇੱਕ ਸੋਲਿਸਿਟਰ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ, ਮਿਸਟਰ ਐਂਡਰੂ ਲੂਕਸ A.G. Co solicitors ਤੋਂ, ਤੇ ਇਹ ਵੇਲਸ ਤੋਂ ਨੇ। ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਪੂਰੀ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਸੰਤੁਸ਼ਟੀ ਰੱਖਿਓ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਸਿੱਖ ਚੈਨਲ ਤੇ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਵੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਆ ਉਹਨੂੰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਵੀ ਪੂਰੀ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਚੰਗੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਦੱਸਾਂਗੇ। ਤੁਸੀਂ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਫੋਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੀ, ਅਸੀਂ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਨੰਬਰ ਦੇਵਾਂਗੇ, ਤੇ ਫੋਨ ਕਰਕੇ ਵੀ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣੇ ਹੋਰ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਪੂਰੀ ਕੌਨਫੀਡੈਂਸ਼ੀਅਲਿਟੀ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਪੁੱਛ ਸਕਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤਾਂ ਕਿ ਤੁਹਾਡੇ ਮਨ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਹੈਗਾ ਆ ਜਾਂ ਸੰਤੁਸ਼ਟੀ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਪੰਜਾਬੀ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਪੂਰੀ ਐਡਵਾਈਸ ਚੰਗੀ ਤਰ੍ਹਾਂ ਮਿਲ ਸਕੇ। ਸੋ ਆਓ ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਟਰੋਡਿਊਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਤੇ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਦੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ, ਤੇ ਥੋੜ੍ਹੇ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੇ ਜਨਰਲ ਕੁਐਸਚਨ ਹੁੰਦੇ ਆ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ, ਵਿਲ ਤੋਂ ਰਿਲੇਟਡ, ਵਸੀਹਤ ਜਿਹੜੀ ਹੁੰਦੀ ਆ ਉਸ ਤੋਂ ਰਿਲੇਟਡ, ਉਹ ਅਸੀਂ ਅੱਜ ਟਰਾਈ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਕਿ ਕਲੈਰੀਫਾਈ ਕਰ ਸਕੀਏ। ਸੋ ਆਓ ਹੁਣ ਅਸੀਂ ਉਹਨਾਂ ਨੂੰ ਇੰਟਰੋਡਿਊਸ ਕਰਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੀ। Mr. Andrew Lucas, welcome to the Seek channel. This is perhaps the first time we're seeing you on Seek channel with our viewers who have got a lot of questions to be answered in the field of contentious probate. In simpler terms, I've already explained to the viewers what it means, and I do have a lot of generic questions for you to be answered. But of course, first of all, we welcome you here, and it's nice to have you and your expertise on Seek channel.
Well, thank you. Good afternoon, and it's a great pleasure that the Seek channel have invited me as a guest this afternoon.
And Mr. Lucas, although we are so pleased to have you on our platform, but you know, the topic of wills and the disputes that it can lead to usually is looked upon as a very sad state in the community. Whenever such things happen within the families after a certain person's death, be it from a family member, an elderly family member, the children fight among themselves, or it can be other different scenarios within the family. The whole family dynamics change. There's always a power struggle, which is considered a quite sad state within the families in the South Asian community. So a lot of people do suffer from this, and they do have a lot of questions. But I think the first and foremost question that anybody would need answer to, and I think it's a very vague and generic one, is that if something like that happens to me, where I feel I'm being left out, or perhaps there is something fishy going on there. Maybe there was my name, but then something else happened which I wasn't aware of. What options do I have? Who do I contact to? Where do I make a start? I think this is the first and foremost thing that comes to anybody's mind. And I do appreciate that it might be very vague and large area to answer, but I think this would be the most helpful thing to have an answer on. That what are our options if something like that happens to us?
Well, the main thing is, and as you rightly say, it is a very sad situation, but the main thing is when you find yourself in dispute with other family members to seek legal advice. Because what you need to do is register with the probate registry what's known as a caveat. Now, a caveat is a restriction which prevents a will being given a grant of probate, being granted probate. Because what you don't want to happen is for a family member to start winding up an estate, obtaining probate, selling assets, and then finding out that your potentially assets, which could be yours, have already been distributed amongst other members of the family. So that's the first thing. You register a caveat to stop a grant of probate being granted. Once you've done that, you then move into the second stage, which is making a claim against the estate. And that really depends how you think you have been prejudiced by the estate being distributed in the way that it has. For example, if you're a child and you haven't been left anything by your parent who's passed away, you may have a claim against that parent if they were maintaining you, for example. You'd have what's known as a dependency claim. That's brought under a piece of legislation known as the Inheritance Provision for Family Independence Act 1975. You could say, my parent was supporting me, I'm not anymore, I've been left out of the will, therefore I claim from the estate money which I should get as a dependent of my mother, my father, whoever. Alternatively, you may feel that undue influence or pressure has been brought upon your relative during their lifetime to make the will. What's known as coercion, that they've been forced to make the will. Maybe the person has been unwell for a while, maybe they're elderly, maybe they have memory problems, early onset dementia, for example, and all of a sudden the will is entered into, and you might think to yourself, well, they weren't in their right mind when they executed this will. They didn't know what they were doing. Yeah. Alternatively, as I say, coercion is another element of that, particularly when an elderly person is unwell. They depend on a family member, and even if they are in possession of their senses, they may find it very difficult to resist a family member doing what they are told to do. Family member could, for example, take them to a solicitor, tell them what to put in the will. They could make a will leaving their estate to that family member. That is coercion. They've been forced by undue influence to enter that will and to make that will in the terms they have. And as a result of that, the person has been prejudiced. You may be prejudiced as a beneficiary if that happens. You get other scenarios where a promise might be made to a potential beneficiary during their lifetime. A parent might say, I will leave you my house. I will leave you half of my estate. It may be that the beneficiary has then changed their lifestyle because of that. Maybe the potential beneficiary, the child, has looked after the parent, given up work to do so, lost income, on reliance of their promise that they will inherit the house, then they don't. In that sort of situation, you have a claim. It's what's known as an estoppel claim against the estate. It's a promise based on a detriment. The person suffered loss. They have a claim. As you can see, these issues are many and various. Every case is different. Most important thing is to get legal advice as soon as this happens to stop the estate being administered, and then to work out in conjunction with a professional legal advisor the best route to bring a claim against the estate, so you don't lose your entitlement to what is yours.
ਬਿਲਕੁਲ ਜਿੱਦਾਂ ਕਿ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਐਂਡਰੂ ਲੂਕਸ ਨੇ ਦੱਸਿਆ ਕਿ ਕਈ ਪੋਸੀਬਿਲਿਟੀਜ਼ ਹੋ ਸਕਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ ਆਫਟਰ ਸਮਬਡੀਜ਼ ਡੈਥ, ਜਦੋਂ ਕਿਸੇ ਦੀ ਡੈਥ ਹੋ ਜਾਏ ਔਰ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਕਈ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਦੇ ਸ਼ੱਕ ਜਿਹੜੇ ਨੇ ਉਹ ਪੈ ਸਕਦੇ ਨੇ। ਜੇ ਤੁਹਾਨੂੰ ਲੱਗਦਾ ਆ ਕਿ ਇੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਕੋਈ ਸਿਚੁਏਸ਼ਨ ਆ ਰਹੀ ਹੈਗੀ ਆ, ਦ ਬੈਸਟ ਥਿੰਗ ਫਰਸਟ ਆਫ ਆਲ ਟੂ ਡੂ ਇਜ਼ ਟੂ ਸੀਕ ਐਡਵਾਈਸ, ਕਿ ਆਪ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਕੁਛ ਕਰਨ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜਾਂ ਫਿਰ ਗਲਤ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਸਾਈਨ ਕਰਨ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ, ਗਲਤ ਚੀਜ਼ ਨੂੰ ਅਪਰੂਵ ਕਰਨ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ, ਗਲਤ ਜਗ੍ਹਾ ਆਪਣੀ ਹਾਂ ਦੇਣ ਤੋਂ ਪਹਿਲਾਂ ਜ਼ਰੂਰੀ ਆ ਕਿ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪਣਾ ਲੀਗਲ ਐਡਵਾਈਸ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਲੈ ਲਓ। ਮਿਸਟਰ ਲੂਕਸ, I mean, that did cover a lot of possibilities and scenario that people should come forward and first of all seek legal advice on. That just makes me ask you if you could tell the viewers about the experience of A.G.Lucas and Co as practice in this field. For how many years you've been doing this, and what were the scenarios usually that you have encountered dealing with, especially, if any, South Asian family cases?
Well, I've been handling this type of contentious probate work, as it's called, as a litigation solicitor for the last 30 years. So I've encountered all sorts of different scenarios. Obviously, client confidentiality is very important, so I can't go into too much in terms of specific details, but often in the context of Asian families, I've acted for many Asian families for many years. It is a dispute within the family. It's often a case of one relative perhaps exercising undue influence over a parent whilst they're alive, and other members of the family being excluded from the will. What needs to happen there is the excluded relative needs to protect their position as quickly as possible. A lot of these disputes as well, perhaps outside the Asian community, concern farms, oddly enough. Often there's disputes within farms, well, it can apply to other assets as well. A large asset is left to a relative, often a son, to the exclusion of other family members. Maybe a business as well. A business might be left to one son or two sons. The daughters are excluded. Or maybe another son who's fallen out with the parents is excluded. All that can potentially lead to injustice for that person. And if it's a large estate, life-changing sums of money can be lost, of course. The most important thing to do, as I say, because as you can probably see from the explanations I'm giving, this is a complicated area, and every situation is different. So the most important thing is to get legal advice as soon as possible after the person has died. But on a positive note, although a lot of these cases are very painful and there's a dispute within families which is hurtful, the vast majority of these cases, probably 90% or more, ultimately settle outside court through negotiation. So although it's a very bitter situation, ultimately it resolves itself. And I've known situations where family members at the end of the process have shaken hands and rebuilt their relationship. So positives can come out of these situations if handled correctly. And indeed, the main thing is everybody feels at the end of the day that they've got the share that's rightfully theirs, and a fair situation has come about eventually.
Well, in some cases, it can turn better, and in some cases, can work out by the end of it. But another thing that really concerns family members when they are about to pursue such cases is the length of time it's going to take for this to resolve, and also how much is it going to cost me. This is what actually makes people wonder by the end of it, that is it really worth me fighting for my inheritance, which is already somehow in limbo, and spending all this money with the solicitor, spending all these years and time, because predominantly people believe that it takes quite a while for cases to get resolved in court. So would you please give an idea to our viewers about the length of time it takes for resolution to be brought, or the expense that people can incur in hiring solicitors to resolve matters?
Well, every case is different, and of course the length of time is determined by how complicated the estate is. Typically you're looking at a process that's going to take 18 months or more to be resolved. But what I always advise people is that if you can bring the claim to a conclusion sooner rather than later, that's much better for everybody. I always recommend mediation, to see if the parties can get round the table with a trained mediator and work out a solution. And generally, I find that works, and a mediated solution can bring about an early resolution of the dispute. In terms of cost, it doesn't necessarily have to be it can be an expensive process, but it doesn't have to be, because a lot of solicitors will act on a no-win, no-fee basis, whereby they take a share of the estate, a percentage of the estate, or the individual share of the estate, plus their costs in settlement of their fees. There's risk to the solicitor in doing that, of course, because if the claim isn't successful, they get nothing. But that does introduce a way where somebody who's got perhaps very little money, if any, can pursue their right and ultimately get a settlement without having to spend money themselves.
Right. But Mr. Lucas, that brings me to think, what about liabilities on an estate? If a person does inherit something through their parents' will, but then it comes to light later on that the estate has some tax liabilities, how can they then navigate through the inheritance, the future of the estate?
Well, every estate is different. Inheritance tax is a different question again. Inheritance tax is going to be payable on estates which are worth £325,000 or more, although there are various exemptions between spouses, and so that level of inheritance tax can be kept down. Inheritance tax is going to have to be paid, and what's going to be divided up ultimately is the estate less inheritance tax. A very small estate, of course, may not be worth contesting, but as you can see from those figures, you can still have a reasonably large estate, i.e. below 325,000, which is worth contesting, and tax isn't an issue. Even if it's above inheritance tax, to reach that level, it's going to be quite a large estate. So I wouldn't worry too much about the tax issues. And what an experienced professional will do with a client is sit them down from the outset and evaluate the size of the estate and whether this makes sense financially to pursue the situation. The most important thing is, armed with this information, the client can make an informed decision as to whether to proceed or not. Most solicitors will advise on the basis that the initial interview is free, myself included. So there'll be no cost just in sitting down with a solicitor, discussing the position, getting a general overview, so the individual can make an informed decision about what to do next.
That's quite helpful. Thank you very much, Mr. Lucas, for the information that you have shared. But this is just, I think, the just the shallow bit of this very deep topic. I would like to speak again another time where we actually address some of the issues that specifically South Asian community faces when they have to go with contentious probate, and we look forward to speaking to you again. For today, we will have to keep it to this, but it was amazing to speak to you, Mr. Lucas, and we look forward to having you again on Seek Channel.
Well, thank you. It's been a great pleasure talking with you, and thank you for inviting me on the Seek Channel.
Thank you very much. ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਅਸੀਂ ਇੱਥੇ ਫਤਿਹ ਬੁਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ ਜੀ, ਲੇਕਿਨ ਤੁਸੀਂ ਅਗਲੇ ਐਪੀਸੋਡ ਵਾਸਤੇ ਜ਼ਰੂਰ ਦੇਖਦੇ ਰਹੋ ਸੀਕ ਚੈਨਲ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਅਸੀਂ ਇਸ ਟੌਪਿਕ ਨੂੰ ਹੋਰ ਡੀਪਲੀ ਡੂੰਘੇ ਤਰੀਕੇ ਨਾਲ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ, ਜਿੱਥੇ ਕਿ ਸਾਡੇ ਆਪਣੇ ਆਪ ਦੇ ਪਰਿਵਾਰਾਂ ਦੇ ਵਿੱਚ ਕਿੱਦਾਂ ਦੀ ਸਾਨੂੰ ਮੁਸ਼ਕਿਲਾਂ ਯੂਜੂਅਲੀ ਆਉਂਦੀਆਂ ਨੇ, ਉਹਦੇ ਬਾਰੇ ਵੀ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ ਮਿਸਟਰ ਐਂਡਰੂ ਲੂਕਸ A.G. Solicitors and Co ਦੇ ਨਾਲ। ਤੇ ਇੱਥੇ ਅਸੀਂ ਫਤਿਹ ਬੁਲਾਉਂਦੇ ਹਾਂ। ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ, ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ ਜੀ।